Marcus Thompson stood back to admire his new driveway, a smile of satisfaction spreading across his weathered face. After nearly 20 years in Oakwood Estates, he had finally saved enough to replace the cracked patchwork concrete that had greeted him every day since he purchased the modest colonial. The afternoon sun caught the edges of the cobblestone pavers, highlighting their warm sandstone hue and the craftsmanship that had gone into their insulation. "Worth every penny," he murmured, running his hand along the decorative border of darker stones that framed the driveway. The border had been a splurge, but it complemented the brick facade of his home perfectly. The contractor had just left after spending 3 meticulous days transforming the eyesore into what Marcus considered a genuine improvement to the neighborhood's appearance. Oakwood Estates had changed considerably since Marcus had moved in. What had once been a friendly community where neighbors borrowed lawnmowers and hosted block parties had gradually transformed into something more rigid. 5 years ago, the Homeowners Association had expanded from a volunteer group that organized community picnics to a formal entity with bylaws, committees, and increasingly specific rules about everything from holiday decorations to mailbox designs. Marcus had largely flown under the radar during these changes. His job as a civil engineer kept him busy enough that he rarely attended the HOA meetings, simply paying his dues on time and keeping his property tidy. He had, however, been meticulous about following proper procedures for his driveway renovation. He'd submitted detailed plans, including samples of the pavers and border stones, and had waited patiently through 2 review cycles before receiving written approval 6 months earlier. The sharp rap at his front door jolted Marcus from his admiration. Through the decorative glass, you could make out the silhouette of a woman with perfectly coiffed hair. With a sense of creeping dread, he recognized Patricia Winters, the newly elected HOA president who had campaigned on a platform of enhancing neighborhood aesthetics and property values. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson," Patricia said the moment he opened the door, her voice clipped and professional. She didn't wait for a response before continuing. "I was driving by and couldn't help but notice your modification." She gestured toward the driveway with a manicured hand, her French-tipped nails gleaming in the sunlight. In her other hand, she clutched a clipboard to her chest like a shield. Her pastel cardigan and pressed slacks gave her the appearance of a real estate agent about to list a property, but the tightness around her eyes suggested something less pleasant. "I just finished it today," Marcus replied, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Quite an improvement, don't you think?" Patricia's thin smile never reached her eyes. "I'm afraid there seems to be an issue. Our records don't show approval for this particular design." She flipped through several pages on her clipboard. "Specifically, the color is non-conforming with our approved palette, and that border," she paused, lips pursing slightly, "is rather ostentatious for our community standards." Marcus felt his chest tighten. There must be some mistake. "I have written approval from the architectural committee. I followed every step of the process. The previous committee was unfortunately quite lenient in their interpretations of our standards," Patricia said, producing a form from her clipboard with efficient precision. "As the current board has clarified the guidelines, we're having to address several oversights." She handed him the paper, an official violation notice, complete with the HOA letterhead and Patricia's flowing signature at the bottom. "You'll need to remove the non-conforming elements within 30 days. After that, I'm afraid there will be daily fines of $100 assessed to your account." Marcus scanned the document in disbelief. "This can't be right. I specifically chose these materials because they were on the approved list." "That list has been updated," Patricia replied smoothly. "The notice explains everything. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the current standards." She glanced pointedly at her watch. "I have several other properties to visit today. Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson." Before Marcus could formulate a response, Patricia had turned on her heel and was making her way down his front walk, clipboard still clutched to her chest. He watched as she paused to take a photo of his driveway before continuing to her white SUV parked at the curb. The violation notice lay on Marcus's kitchen table, the HOA letterhead almost glaring up at him under the pendant light. 3 cups of coffee into the evening, Marcus had moved from disbelief to calculated anger. His home office had become ground zero for what he was now mentally calling Operation Driveway Defense. Banker's boxes from his attic lined the floor, each containing meticulously organized household files from his years in Oakwood Estates. If there was one advantage to being an engineer, it was his compulsive documentation of everything. His ex-wife had called it obsessive. He preferred thorough. "I know it's in here somewhere," Marcus muttered, flipping through a folder labeled Home Improvements 2023 to 2024. His fingers stopped on a sheet with the HOA logo. Bingo. The approval letter, dated exactly 6 months ago, included not only written permission for the driveway renovation, but also attached samples of the approved materials, the exact sandstone pavers and darker border stones now gracing his property. It bore the signatures of 3 architectural committee members, including the previous chairperson. Marcus reached for his laptop, opening his email. After a quick search, he found the entire thread of communications with the committee, 12 messages in total, including specific questions about the border design that had been explicitly approved. He printed everything, sliding the papers into a fresh folder labeled Driveway Dispute. The next morning, he called the HOA management company to schedule a hearing with the board. The next open meeting is in 3 weeks, the administrator told him. That's not acceptable. My violation notice gives me 30 days and I need this resolved before any fines are imposed, Marcus replied firmly. I'd like to request a special hearing under Article 7 of the bylaws, which allows for expedited review in cases of potential financial penalty. A pause on the line suggested the administrator was either impressed or annoyed by his knowledge of the bylaws. I'll have to check with Ms. Winters. She typically approves these requests personally. Please do, Marcus said, and please note in your records that I'm formally contesting this violation with documented evidence of prior approval. 2 days later, Marcus received an email confirming a special hearing for the following Monday evening. He spent the weekend preparing his case, organizing his documentation chronologically, and making copies for each board member. Monday evening found him in the Stereo Community Center meeting room, seated alone at a long table facing the 7-member HOA board. Patricia sat center, flanked by board members who looked variously bored, uncomfortable, or, in a few cases, openly hostile. Mr. Thompson, you have requested this special hearing to contest violation notice number 247. Patricia began, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone used to wielding authority. You have 10 minutes to present your case. Marcus distributed his folder of evidence to each member. Thank you for meeting with me. As you can see from these documents, my driveway renovation was fully approved by the Architectural Committee 6 months ago. He walked them through each piece of evidence methodically, finishing with photographs comparing his installed driveway to the exact materials that had been approved. Furthermore, he continued, there's no provision in our bylaws for retroactive enforcement of new standards against previously approved projects. Patricia's expression remained impassive, but her fingers tapped an impatient rhythm on the table. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Thompson, she said when he finished. Unfortunately, the previous committee made several errors in judgment during their tenure. The board voted last month to implement our updated community standards with immediate effect. This includes bringing non-conforming elements into compliance regardless of when they were installed. Marcus leaned forward. That directly contradicts Section 5.3 of our bylaws, which states that approved modifications are grandfathered in when standards change. As president, I have final interpretation of the rules, Patricia replied smoothly. The board has determined that the grandfathering clause applies only to modifications that were compliant with the original community design guidelines from 1998. Marcus glanced around at the other board members. Most avoided his eyes, but one elderly gentleman looked distinctly uncomfortable. Does anyone else on the board have input? Marcus asked. Patricia interjected before anyone could speak. The board has already discussed this matter at length in our executive session. Our decision is unanimous. Marcus noticed the elderly board member's slight frown at this statement, but the man remained silent, alone with his folder of useless approvals and a growing determination to fight back. The law office of Kendall and Associates occupied a modest brick building downtown, its interior a stark contrast to its unassuming exterior. Marcus sat in a leather chair across from Miranda Kendall, a sharp-eyed attorney whose reputation for handling HOA disputes had led him to her door. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the polished wooden desk between them. 20 years of HOA experience, and I still get surprised by the creativity of power-hungry board members, Miranda remarked, setting down the folder containing Marcus's documentation. She had reviewed everything methodically, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. But this is textbook overreach. So I'm right? Marcus asked, leaning forward slightly. Absolutely. Your HOA cannot retroactively enforce new standards against previously approved projects. It violates not just your bylaws, but also state law governing homeowners associations. Miranda flipped through her notes. Furthermore, the president doesn't have final interpretation of the rules. That's not how governance works. The board collectively interprets bylaws, and even then, their interpretation must align with the actual written documents. Relief washed over Marcus. What do we do now? We start with a formal response. Miranda turned to her computer, fingers poised over the keyboard. I'll draft a letter citing the relevant sections of your bylaws and state statutes. We'll give them 10 days to assign the violation notice before we escalate. Escalate to what? Marcus asked. First, we request mediation, which is typically required before litigation. But based on what you've told me about Ms. Winters, I suspect we'll end up filing an injunction. She glanced up at him. Fair warning, this could get expensive. HOA disputes often do. Marcus nodded grimly. The driveway cost me $18,000. I'm not tearing it up because some power-hungry neighbor decided she doesn't like the color. 2 days later, Marcus drove to Patricia's house with Miranda's letter in hand. The attorney had suggested certified mail, but Marcus wanted to see Patricia's reaction. Her home, one of the largest in Oakwood Estates, featured a circular driveway with a water feature in the center. He noted with irony that her driveway pavers were remarkably similar to his own, though with an even more elaborate border. After ringing the doorbell twice, he was greeted by Patricia's husband, a thin man with perpetually startled eyebrows. "Is Patricia available?" Marcus asked politely. "She's here, but—" the man began before Patricia appeared behind him. "What do you want, Mr. Thompson?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Marcus extended the envelope. "This is a formal response to the violation notice prepared by my attorney." Patricia didn't take it. "I'm not accepting legal correspondence at my home. If you have documentation, send it to the management company." "The violation came directly from you, so my response is directed to you," Marcus countered. The letter explains that the retroactive enforcement is invalid under both HOA bylaws and state law. It requests that you resign the violation notice within 10 days. Patricia's expression hardened. "You're wasting everyone's time and money. The board's decision is final." "That's for a judge to decide," Marcus replied evenly. "Is that a threat?" Patricia's voice rose slightly. "It's a statement of fact. I'm contesting an invalid violation through proper legal channels." Patricia stepped back. "Send your paperwork to the management company. And stop wasting your money on lawyers. The fines will be enough of a financial burden." She closed the door firmly. As Marcus walked back to his car, he noticed curtains twitching in neighboring houses. Word about his confrontation would spread quickly through the gossip network that seemed to power most HOA communities. That evening, Marcus returned from a dinner out to find a new violation notice taped to his front door. This one cited improper landscaping around his driveway, specifically mentioning the small decorative rocks he'd installed along the edges years ago. The fine for sleep eluded Marcus. At 2 a.m., he sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, a half-empty mug of chamomile tea gone cold beside him. The blue light of the screen illuminated his tired face as he scrolled through the HOA's governing documents for the 5th time. "There has to be something here," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. After receiving the second violation notice, Marcus had decided to dig deeper. As a homeowner and dues-paying member, he was entitled to access HOA records, meeting minutes, financial statements, contracts, and voting records. Getting those records, however, was proving more difficult than it should have been. He had emailed the management company 3 days ago requesting the documents. Their initial response claimed they needed processing time. When he followed up, citing the state law requiring production of records within 10 business days, the representative said they were experiencing staffing shortages. Marcus opened a new browser tab and logged into his email, finding a response from his attorney that had arrived after midnight. "Miranda must be burning the midnight oil too," he mused as he opened the message. Her email was brief but effective, containing a draft of a formal records request citing specific statutes and threatening legal action if the documents weren't produced within 48 hours. She had already sent it to the management company, copying the entire board. By noon the next day, Marcus received a large email with several PDF attachments from a clearly disgruntled management company representative. The message noted tersely that some requested documents were still being compiled, but the initial batch was attached. Marcus spent his lunch break scanning through meeting minutes, finding them suspiciously sparse on details, especially regarding expenditure approvals. The financial statements were slightly more revealing, showing several large payments to a company called Winters Construction and Paving LLC over the past 6 months. "Winters," Marcus whispered, immediately making the connection to Patricia's surname. After work, Marcus dove deeper into the documents. In the board meeting minutes from February, he found a brief mention of a contract award for repaving the road to the community office. The minute simply stated, "Motion to accept bid for office road repaving from qualified contractor." Motion passed 6-1. No contractor name, no bid amount, no competing bids mentioned. But the financial statement from March showed a $43,500 payment to Winters Construction and Paving LLC labeled Infrastructure Improvement, Office Access Road Deposit. Marcus searched online for information about the company, finding it had been formed just 18 months ago. The business registration listed Ronald Winters as the primary owner. Ronald Winters, Marcus repeated, typing the name into his search engine alongside Patricia Winters. Several social media photos appeared showing Patricia at what appeared to be a family gathering, her arm around a man identified in the caption as "My brother-in-law Ron." Marcus leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling into place. Patricia's brother-in-law had been awarded a substantial contract without competitive bidding being mentioned in the minutes at a price that seemed excessive for repaving a quarter-mile access road. Further digging revealed 3 other payments to Winter's construction over the past year: playground resurfacing, clubhouse parking lot repairs, and tennis court maintenance, totaling nearly $200,000. None of the meeting minutes detailed competitive bidding processes for these projects. As the night deepened, Marcus turned his attention to the violation notices. The management company had included a spreadsheet of all violations issued in the past year. Marcus sorted the data by date, noticing an immediate spike after Patricia took office 4 months ago. He then cross-referenced homeowner names against the petition that had circulated during the contentious HOA election where Patricia had won by a slim margin. A pattern emerged that made his stomach tighten. 13 of the 15 homeowners who had openly supported Patricia's opponent had received violation notices within weeks of her taking office. In contrast, several homes with obvious violations, including one with the backyard of 1442 Oakwood Drive, buzzed with hushed conversation as Marcus arrived through the garden gate. Gerald Hoffman, the elderly board member who had organized the meeting, ushered him onto the patio where nearly 20 neighbors had gathered. Marcus recognized most of them: the high school teacher who lived 3 doors down, the retired couple who walked their golden retriever every evening, the young family who had moved in last spring. "Quite a turnout," Marcus whispered to Gerald. "Would have been more, but some folks are afraid of retaliation," Gerald replied, his voice low. "Patricia has eyes everywhere." Gerald called the group to attention, introducing Marcus as someone else who's fighting back. All eyes turned to him, expressions ranging from curious to desperate. "I'm not sure what Gerald has told you," Marcus began, "but I received violation notices for my newly renovated driveway, which was fully approved by the previous board, and suddenly for landscaping issues that have existed for years without complaint." Murmurs of recognition rippled through the group. "But this isn't just about my driveway," Marcus continued. "After researching HOA records, I've found evidence suggesting Patricia Winters is using her position to benefit her family financially and to target homeowners who oppose her election." He connected his laptop to a small projector Gerald had set up, displaying the documents he discovered: the payments to Winters Construction, the pattern of selective enforcement, the vague meeting minutes concealing important details. A woman raised her hand. "I'm Sarah Patel from Maple Court. We got cited for our fence height last month, even though it's been the same height for 5 years. When I mentioned this to Patricia, she suggested we use a board-approved contractor who could help us navigate the approval process more smoothly. The contractor she recommended wanted twice what others quoted." Others shared similar stories: sudden violations for long-standing conditions, suggestions to use specific contractors, approvals mysteriously denied without explanation. Marcus noticed a pattern. Homes requiring significant work after citations often receive recommendations for contractors connected to board members. "This isn't just unfair, it's potentially illegal," said a man Marcus recognized as a corporate attorney from the north side of the neighborhood. "It's self-dealing, selective enforcement, and possibly kickbacks." "What can we do?" asked a frustrated homeowner. "Patricia controls everything." Marcus shared what his attorney had told him. "According to our bylaws, we can call for a special election to remove board members if we get signatures from 60% of homeowners." "That's 184 signatures," Gerald calculated quickly. "Not impossible, but challenging." "And risky," added a woman in the back. "What if we fail? The retaliation could be worse." Marcus understood their fears. "That's why we need documentation, lots of it. Every questionable violation, every inflated contractor quote, every instance of selective enforcement. Together, it creates a pattern no one can ignore." They spent the next hour organizing. Gerald created a secure online document where homeowners could upload evidence. Sarah volunteered to draft a petition. The corporate attorney offered to review everything from a legal perspective. "We need to move quickly but carefully," Marcus advised. "If Patricia catches wind of this, she'll make it harder to gather signatures." As if on cue, Gerald's phone buzzed with a text message. His face darkened as he read it. "What is it?" Marcus asked. "My neighbor just sent this," Gerald said, turning his phone around to show a message with an attached photo of the construction notice. "Patricia's brother-in-law's company just started tearing up the office access road this morning. The schedule had that project slated for next quarter." Marcus's stomach tightened. "She's accelerating the project before we can interfere." "She must suspect something," Sarah whispered. The group exchanged nervous glances, the stakes suddenly higher. They were no longer just fighting citations. They were challenging entrenched corruption that had anticipated their resistance. "This changes nothing," Marcus said firmly, standing up. "In fact, it confirms everything we found. If she's rushing the project, she's worried. And if she's worried, we're on the right track." The meeting adjourned with a newfound sense of urgency. As homeowners filtered out through the garden gate in 2s and 3s to avoid attention, Marcus hung back with Gerald. "Do you think we can really win this?" Gerald asked quietly. Marcus watched the last of their neighbors disappear down the street, each carrying a piece of their shared plan. I think, he said carefully, that Patricia has just made her first major mistake, and I intend to make her regret it. Morning sun glinted off metal construction equipment parked along the narrow access road leading to the HOA office. Marcus drove slowly past the scene, noting workers in high-visibility vests already breaking ground with jackhammers. A foreman in a hard hat bearing the Winters Construction logo directed operations from beside a pickup truck. Marcus continued to the end of the road where the HOA office, a converted residential property, sat unoccupied this early in the day. He parked nearby and took several photos of the construction activity with his phone, careful to capture the company logo on the equipment. 20 minutes later, Marcus walked into the county permit office, a fluorescent-lit space with outdated furniture and the distinct smell of old paper. At the counter, a middle-aged woman with glasses hanging from a chain around her neck looked up from her computer. "How can I help you?" she asked. "I'm inquiring about a construction permit for Oakwood Estates," Marcus explained. "They're repaving the access road to the HOA office building this morning." The clerk, whose nameplate identified her as Dorothy, typed something into her computer. Address: 1200 Oak Haven Drive. More typing, followed by a frown. "I'm showing a permit application submitted 3 weeks ago for that address, but it hasn't been approved yet." Marcus feigned surprise. "Really? Because construction started this morning." Dorothy's frown deepened. "That can't be right. Let me check something." She clicked through several screens. Yes, the application is still under review. There were concerns about the drainage plan. The engineering department requested additional documentation last week. "So there's no active permit for the work?" Marcus confirmed. "Absolutely not," Dorothy stated firmly. "Construction cannot legally begin without an approved permit." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her the photos he'd just taken. "This is happening right now." Dorothy's expression changed from confusion to concern. "That's a problem. A big one. Let me get my supervisor." 5 minutes later, Marcus sat across from Bradley Chen, the county's chief permit officer, explaining the situation. By the time he finished, Bradley was already on the phone with the county inspector. "We need someone out there immediately," Bradley said into the phone. "Yes. I understand you're busy. This takes priority. It's an active violation." He paused, listening. "Perfect. Call me when you arrive." Bradley hung up and turned to Marcus. "Inspector Johnson will be there within the hour. This is a clear violation of county ordinances. Construction without permits carries significant penalties, $1,000 per day plus potential additional fines for any code violations discovered." "What happens to the construction already underway?" Marcus asked. "Work will be stopped immediately until proper permits are obtained," Bradley explained, "and getting those permits may take longer now that they've violated the process. We'll need to verify nothing was improperly constructed before the inspection." Marcus thanked them for their prompt attention and headed to work, strategically taking a route that wouldn't pass by the construction site again. He didn't want to be seen as the likely source of the coming inspection. Around lunchtime, Marcus received a text from Gerald. "County inspector shut down road work. Patricia having meltdown at site." Marcus suppressed a smile as he replied, "Any details?" Gerald's response came quickly. "Stop work order posted. Equipment being removed. Patricia arguing with inspector and making calls. Contractor looks furious." Throughout the afternoon, updates filtered in from the coalition members. By 3 p.m., the road was left partially demolished, sections of pavement removed but not replaced, creating an uneven, hazardous surface that was neither properly excavated nor repaved. The community center hummed with an energy Marcus had never felt in the typically sterile space. Nearly 200 homeowners packed the room, filling every chair and lining the walls. Patricia and the board members sat at a long table facing the crowd, their expressions ranging from Patricia's barely contained fury to the open discomfort of several board members. Marcus stood near the back with Gerald and Sarah, surveying the crowd they had mobilized over 3 intense weeks of door-to-door campaigns, evidence gathering, and late-night strategy sessions. The petition for a special election had garnered signatures from 72% of homeowners, far exceeding the required threshold. Gerald, as the lone dissenting board member, had called the meeting to order and explain its purpose, to vote on removing the current board based on documented evidence of misconduct and violations of fiduciary duty. Before we proceed to the vote, Gerald announced Mr. Thompson has requested 5 minutes to present evidence supporting the petition. As Marcus walked to the front, he felt Patricia's glare following him. He connected his laptop to the projector and faced the assembled homeowners. "Many of you signed our petition because you personally experienced selective enforcement, questionable contractor recommendations, or suspicious denial of reasonable requests," Marcus began. "What you may not know is the extent of the problem." He methodically presented his findings, financial records showing the inflated contracts to Winter's construction, emails revealing Patricia's involvement in micromanaging violation notices, and a statistical analysis of citation patterns that demonstrated clear bias against homeowners who had opposed her election. The most concerning evidence, Marcus continued, involves the attempted rush construction of the HOA office access road without proper permits, potentially exposing our community to significant liability and fines. The room remained silent as Marcus played a recording from his meeting with the county permit officer confirming the project had proceeded illegally. Patricia rose halfway through the recording. "This is a witch hunt based on manipulated evidence," she declared. "Mr. Thompson has a personal vendetta because he was cited for his non-conforming driveway." Sarah stood from her seat. "Is it also a personal vendetta when you cited my fence that's been the same height for 5 years? Or the Johnson's mailbox that was approved by the previous board? Or the Garcia's flower beds that you suddenly decided were too colorful?" Other homeowners rose, each sharing brief accounts of similarly suspicious violations. Patricia attempted to speak over them, but Gerald used his temporary authority as meeting chair to restore order. "The evidence speaks for itself," Marcus concluded. "Our HOA has been used as a personal tool for financial gain and settling scores. I move that we proceed to the vote." Patricia made one final attempt to seize control. "This meeting is out of order. These accusations are baseless and potentially defamatory. As president, Your authority exists only through the consent of the homeowners." Miranda interjected from beside Marcus, her legal credentials lending weight to her words. "And that consent can be withdrawn through the procedure outlined in Section 12 of the bylaws, which is exactly what's happening now." The vote proceeded via secret ballot. Marcus, Gerald, and Miranda supervised the counting, along with 2 neutral homeowners who hadn't signed the petition but wanted transparency in the process. The results were overwhelming. 173 votes to remove the board, 28 to retain them. Patricia didn't wait for the announcement of the interim board nominations. She gathered her things and strode toward the exit, her face flushed with humiliation. She paused briefly beside Marcus. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Actually, it is," he replied quietly. "But your brother-in-law's legal issues with the county might just be beginning." After Patricia's departure, the remaining meeting proceeded with surprising efficiency. The homeowners elected an interim board, with Marcus reluctantly accepting a position after multiple nominations. "Our first motion," Gerald said after the new board was seated, "concerns the violation notices issued during the previous administration. The interim board unanimously voted to rescind all questionable citations, establish a transparent bidding process for community projects, and hire a professional management company with no ties to board members to ensure consistent rule enforcement."